Now, it took months. It took months for my therapist to get anything out of me about my relationship. But in the end, when my therapist finally wore me down and she asked one last time, Marcus, how did that make you feel? And finally I said, I felt abandoned. I felt cheated. 4 years out of my life I can't get back. And all it counted for was to make her a better girlfriend for the next guy. What's up, everybody? Marcus here. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna talk about black men and heartbreak. This is something that's long overdue to be talked about because we don't talk about it at all enough. So here we go. Let's get ready to heal. As always, if you like what we're doing, go ahead, hit the subscribe button, smash the like button. And if you really want to be a supporter, go ahead, check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. So one of the things that came up in therapy is dealing with heartbreak. I had a breakup a couple years ago. It was about the end of, it was like summer of 2018. So yeah, it was a while ago. I know. But I'm still having trouble with it. It's one of the things that's come up in therapy. And it's one of the things I realized that black men, we do not handle very well. And it is yet another thing that radiates out and it affects the entire community. It most certainly affects our relationships going forward. And it's something we need to talk more about. But I'm gonna be real. I almost didn't make this video because I inevitably am gonna end up talking about my ex. And I just don't wanna just make a video where I'm just bashing my ex, which is gonna be hard to do. I'm gonna need a drink for this. So I'm gonna try to be fair because at the end of the day, breakups have two sides. So I'm gonna try to sit here and not just spend the whole video just bashing my ex, like how I spent 4 years helping her get past her emotional fragility, boundless insecurities, and self-doubt just to get dumped out of the blue the second she didn't need her hand held anymore. Yeah, like that. That's the sort of thing we won't be doing in this video. The biggest thing that has been hard for me to admit in therapy, even to my therapist, was that it's been more than 2 years now and I'm still not over my ex. And black men, we are never supposed to admit to any such weakness in our lives ever. But it oftentimes is the truth. And it's something we gotta talk about, so we're gonna talk about it right now. So today we're gonna go through 5 terrible ways that black men cope with heartbreak. If you've watched either one of my last videos, which you should if you haven't, then you know I was going through a whole lot in 2018. I had just lost guardianship of my mom and she was getting put into a nursing home. We were losing the family home and everything just seemed like it was falling apart, except for my relationship. Now, that relationship wasn't easy. My girlfriend at the time, she was emotionally challenging, you might say. If I'm being honest, she was the most emotionally fragile girl I've ever dated in my life. In the beginning, when I realized that that's how she was, that I would never, ever belittle her problems. I would never compare my problems to hers. I would be there for her emotionally, the way my father was never there for my mother. The bi-weekly emotional meltdowns, the existential crises, the teary-eyed phone calls in the middle of the night. I lost a lot of sleep in that relationship, but it was okay. I made sure she knew that she could always count on me. I was going through a lot, but I never let my problems interfere with me being there for her when she needed it. When she needed a shoulder to cry on, I was there. When she had a crisis, emotional crisis, I was there. No matter what, every single time for 4 years. And you know what? It started to get better. I started to look at my situation in a little bit of a brighter light. Despite everything happening with my mom and the nursing home and the court and losing the house, I started looking on the bright side. I had just gotten a new job, better pay, better benefits than the job I had just before it. I was getting a new place, and I had my girl. And my girl was in a much more emotionally resilient, confident place than she's been the whole time I've known her. And I know I had something to do with that. So I started looking for engagement rings. And I thought, you know what? Now that I'm the one going through an emotional crisis, I know I can count on my girl to be there for me. What do you mean you want to break up? Now, I say all this and I'm making jokes, but no one's feelings should be belittled or made fun of just because they freak out over things that perhaps wouldn't bother you as much. But the part of the conversation that we don't have is how emotionally draining it can be to be with someone who falls to pieces at every minor setback. How sometimes you feel like you have to walk on eggshells so that you don't send them into another emotional meltdown over the slightest criticism. So let's get into it. Number 1, get drunk and stay that way. Black men, our first instinct is to suppress. When it comes to emotions of pain, not just pain, but vulnerability and weakness, that a woman did this to us, our first instinct, what has been inculcated into us, that's an SAT word for you. What we've been taught and the examples that have been given to us since we were kids is that we cannot feel those feelings. So we have to numb those feelings out any way that you can. And a lot of black men, we use alcohol, we use weed, we use other substances to numb out our feelings. The very first thing I did after my breakup was go get drunk. I was standing right on the corner of Chicago Avenue in Michigan when my girl broke up with me. Tears streaming down my face, dripping off of my chin. I will never look at that corner the same way ever again. The first thing I did is I found the closest bar and I sat there and I drank until I ran out of money. And then I did the same thing the next day and the day after that and the day after that. Honestly, those first 3 or 4 months after breaking up were a blur of just being drunk and being hungover. I suppose I went to work at some point, but as all of us find out, drinking our problems away never works. No matter what I did, every single morning I woke up, the first thing I could think about was my ex. The first thing I could think about were those painful feelings, and I had this knot in my chest that persisted for damn near a year, and it would not go away no matter how much I drank or smoked. Nothing helped. Which leads me to the second terrible method of coping that black men use. Hop immediately into another relationship and or just grief bang someone hotter than your ex. Now, I have to admit, I was a bit nervous about this next part because I currently know at least 3 guys who are doing this right now. At least 3 guys who have ended long relationships abruptly and hopped immediately into relationships with, physically more attractive, often younger women than their exes. And I don't want anybody coming at me because they think that this part is targeting them, but it is kind of targeting them. Oftentimes we hop right into another relationship with someone more attractive, someone younger, someone of another race because we think they'll be easier. We think they'll appreciate us more. They'll appreciate what our exes didn't. As much as I want to sit this one out, I've done this as well. About 7 or so months after my ex dumped me and I'm still down in the dumps, I'm still getting drunk all the time, still trying to stuff those emotions down and just beat them into submission unsuccessfully. I end up getting contacted on Facebook by someone I dated a couple years before I met my ex. Beautiful girl, beautiful. And we chit chat on Facebook, messaging back and forth. We exchange numbers, we catch up. And at one point she says, I heard you got a new place. You gonna invite me over or what? Say less. So she comes over and she is gorgeous. Now look, my ex was cute as a button, but this girl was a whole zipper. I mean, she walks in the door, cute as all get out, 5'10", thick as cold peanut butter. And I'm sitting there going, now this is how you get over getting dumped. And we do the damn thing, and I don't feel any better. And I'm sitting there confused. I'm like, I just went on a magical merry-go-round. This girl just took me on a guided tour of Nasty Town. So after all of that, best sex I've had in years, and I couldn't understand it. I'm sitting here laying in bed with a beautiful girl who all she wanted was some of this chocolate goodness. And all I can think about is how much I miss cuddling with my ex every night to go to sleep. How I missed this little spot on my ex's shoulder, and it had a little bit of pudge, and she was a little self-conscious about it, but I loved it because it was my little nuzzle spot, and I would just sit there and just nuzzle my head there, and I would just fall asleep, and it was beautiful. So after hooking up with this girl, I saw it for what it was. Empty. And that emptiness can lead to resentment and anger, which leads us to the next point. Terrible coping method number 3. Start blaming all your problems on women in general and just bash all women because women are evil and they're the devil. Now, I realize that this probably comes as no surprise to anyone who's ever been on the internet, but black men, we can be really, really bitter when it comes to heartbreak. I mean, we accuse women of being bitter, but black men, we are some bitter mofos, like, let me tell you. In fact, there has been several versions of a meme that have gone across the internet over the past couple years. And it goes something like, black men get cheated on once in the 9th grade and spend the rest of their lives treating women like trash. And she left me for what? Because he was a junior and he was on a football team and he had a car? I was a freshman. I wasn't even old enough to drive yet, Candace. I think what it comes down to is that it's just easier to blame all our problem on generalized flaws with women in general than on just focusing on the one person we were with and also focusing on the parts of our relationship that we weren't the best at. Terrible coping method number 4, begging your ex to take you back. Now, this can take several different forms. Once again, this is something that I had to work through myself. All throughout this last year with the pandemic, I have fought and won the urge not to call my ex. Because at the end of the day, all I was doing was torturing myself. And if you're feeling this way right now, you are torturing yourself and you need to stop torturing yourself. It is a terrible way to go about things. But in order to heal, you got to admit it. And that feeling usually brings you to our final terrible method of coping with heartbreak, shutting out the world completely. And I know a lot of other black guys who've done this as well. We shut things out. We play video games. We watch porn. We shut ourselves off from the world. In my case, I completely lost all interest in other people, in dating. In the last 2.5 going on 3 years, I've probably been on about 3 dates. And even now, the prospect of dating just doesn't appeal to me really much at all. After everything I put into my last relationship, I just don't know if I can do it again. So when it comes to you and your heartbreak, black boy, you need therapy. Because in the end, maybe it's all 5 of these terrible coping methods. Maybe it's just one. But whichever way you're picking is the wrong way. and it's preventing you from healing. So let's talk about 5 better ways to cope with heartbreak. Better coping method number 1, you have to feel your feelings. I know that sounds obvious, right? Of course you feel your feelings. But you know what? Black men, what we do is we stuff everything down, especially if those feelings are uncomfortable to us. We've been taught our entire lives that the only acceptable negative emotion is anger. And you know what? It's okay to be angry, but the root of all anger is hurt. Now, it took months for my therapist to get anything out of me about my relationship, because the feelings I felt at the time were just so jumbled up and confused, and I felt resentment, I felt anger, I felt sadness, all jumbled up. And I felt a lot of feelings that I didn't want to admit that I was feeling. But in the end, when my therapist finally wore me down and she asked one last time, Marcus, you were with your girlfriend for 4 years. You were shopping for engagement rings and she broke up with you out of the blue. How did that make you feel? And finally I said, I felt abandoned. I felt cheated. 4 years out of my life I can't get back. And all it counted for was to make her a better girlfriend for the next guy. And from there, it all came flooding out. I left it all on the table. Everything I had been bottling up for almost 2 years at that time. And in the end, I was sitting there and I was doing the one thing that no black man is ever supposed to admit he's ever done. So much so that I'm sure somebody's calling me a simp right now in the comments. I sat there and I cried over a woman. And my therapist, she sat back and she said, finally, now we can get started. One of the feelings that I had trouble dealing with was my fragile male ego. My fragile male ego poked its ugly head up, just thinking about the fact that after everything, I had left my ex better than when I found her, more emotionally strong, confident, and I know that I had something to do with that. Words of affirmation, I must have given her 1,000 pep talks. I must have picked her up out of her own self-doubting tears 1,000 times. And the thought that because of me, now whoever comes after is gonna have a much easier time dating her than I did. But I'm trying to express some real emotions right now. Give me a break. Better coping method number 2, take responsibility for your role in the breakup. I know, if you're the one with your heart broken, it's the other person's fault, right? Maybe most of it is, but you still have to take responsibility for things that you could have done better. After getting dumped, it feels like your ex is the cruelest, most unfair person in the world. But at the end of the day, there are 2 sides to every breakup, and you have to accept your role in it. And by far, the biggest problem in my relationship was communication. And for a long time, I just blamed all that on my ex. She admittedly was a terrible communicator when it came to communicating what she needed. Her MO was to spend months talking to her mom, her relatives, her best friends from college before I would find out about anything. I wouldn't find out about that she was even upset until months later. When we broke up, she was even bringing stuff up from when we first started dating, like 3.5, almost 4 years earlier. Even her mom acknowledged that. I mean, her mom joked to me once or twice, like, oh, you know her. She'll get mad at you and you won't find out till 6 months later. But even with that said, one of the things that my therapist made me realize is that I was as much to blame, because you know what? I wasn't communicating what I needed out of the relationship very well either. I thought that I was avoiding conflict. But I was letting my ex use me as her personal therapist, her emotional sounding board. I was her full-time shoulder to cry on. And I thought I was respecting her feelings and giving her all the emotional support that she needed, but I never asked if she was doing the same in return. Now, relationships should not be transactional, but you need to have your needs met. I was going through a lot, and I realize now that in trying to prove to my ex that I would be there for her through thick and thin, I never asked myself whether she would do the same. And this is something that I should have been paying attention to. I can sit here and I can bash my ex all day, but I should have been paying attention in the beginning. I should have paid attention to the fact that I was offering my girlfriend at the time more consideration than she was offering me. Better coping method number 3, practice self-compassion. My therapist often encourages me to open up to other people, especially other Black men, since we have the hardest time opening up to anyone. And a few months ago, I did just that with a good friend of mine who's also one of my martial arts students. I opened up to him that, you know, even though it's been 2.5 years, I'm still fighting back the urge to give my ex a call. And it took a lot for me to admit that. And it's funny because he laughed. He said, "Bro, you're like the 5th one of my friends who said that to me." Especially after COVID, a lot of his friends have been fighting the urge to call back their exes, and they've been using him as a sounding board. So when you open up, you realize that you aren't the only one who feels the way you feel. You are not the only one who's going through or has gone through what you're going through right now. And that's very comforting. You feel better when you realize that you're not alone. And no matter what you're going through with your heartbreak, past or current, you are not alone. Better coping method number 4. This might be the most important one. Realize your own self-worth. I can't say that enough. You have value, and you presented value to your ex, no matter how it ended, no matter how she tells you she feels about it. You are valuable and you presented value. Now, this was something that was hard for me to realize because when my ex broke up with me, the reasons that she gave were very hard for me to accept. A, she was very teary-eyed and a lot of her reasons didn't make any sense. Like, for some reason, she brought up Anthony Bourdain's suicide. I still haven't figured out what that was all about. Did she think I had something to do with it or... But one of the things she said, and I'll never forget this, she said, "You've always been there for me, but I need more of a go-getter." Essentially, she stopped just short of calling me a loser. But one of the things therapy and confiding in people who know me made me realize was that I provided a lot in that relationship. At the end of the day, I did leave her better than when I found her. And whether she wants to admit that or not, that doesn't matter. What's important is I know that I provided value to her. She took advantage of it. She didn't appreciate it, but I provided value. But therapy, and again, you know, finally opening up to other people made me realize that I was not alone in feeling the way that I felt. You realize that your feelings aren't unusual. And my therapist said just that. Your feelings are not unusual. Feeling like you put in a lot of work in a relationship or on a person just for when it finally starts to pay off, that person decides they don't want to be with you anymore. Feeling some type of way about that is not unusual and it's not wrong, but take solace in the fact that you provided value to this person's life, whether they acknowledge it, whether they appreciate it. And you can do the same for someone who will appreciate you. And last but not least, better coping method number 5. Don't judge the length of your healing. So I mentioned before, it's been like 2.5 years. Me and my ex, we first broke up. I think it was the end of the summer of 2018. And I haven't recovered. It pains me to admit that. It makes me feel weak. It makes me feel like a simp. It makes me feel like all the negative things that you can think of to even say that out loud. But I'm still not right. But saying it out loud, admitting it to, people that you care about, admitting it to your therapist is the first step on your journey to healing. And one thing therapy has helped me realize, one thing that talking to close friends and family has made me realize, is that you can't put a date on when you're over anything. Healing happens on its own schedule. The most important thing is that you let it happen. So don't worry about how long it takes to get to the end. Just start the journey, and day by day, you'll get closer to healing.